I greet you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Good morning. All my listeners, thank you for listening. This morning, I would like to take you back a little bit, preparing how we can be able to understand the culture which govern the homesteads and gods who are in the homesteads, and how precisely gods moved from being a homestead god to something else like a national god. And then from there, how gods moved from being a national god to a universal god. Now, as far as the culture was concerned, this was a very, very long journey, which does not take only 500 years sometimes. So sometimes even 1,000 years anyway. Precisely how long it took, it is hard to tell, because there's no research which I personally read, which was able to pinpoint that the duration of some of these gods. For example, how long could a god stay as a homestead god? How long? Yes. It is hard to tell. And the records don't seem to really come out in open and say this long. Some stayed longer, some stayed a bit of a shorter time. And how long could a God who has graduated from being a homestead God to a national God, how long can he stay? Also, it is very hazy and can lead to a conclusion that there was no time frame. You see, we precisely have no time frame for such kinds of things. But what we would love to handle today is precisely what prompted these gods to move from being a homestead god and then heading towards a national god. It was a process. It was not a point. It was a process. And it is that particular process we would love to analyze so that we can see how Yahweh could fit in that particular process. The Bible has no sometimes time frame for some of these. For example, we have no an idea how long God remained a homestead God per se. For example, unless we add the few years of Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob, and there is those silent years, which we will have to also analyze in their own way. It is difficult to really point down in terms of years and in terms of precise history that for so long, this is the way it was. However, the process is very clear. Any god had to begin as a homestead god. And that one we have already covered and we have talked about it. And the culture is that it is the homestead which decides who should be their god, you see. But in case of Abraham, we find the records showing us that it is Yahweh who asked to be his homestead God. So at least on that one, God did not follow the procedure, because there was no way Abraham would have ever seen him and then asked him to become his God. So it was God himself who introduced himself to Abraham. Now, Abraham had also a choice. He could say, no, I am very comfortable with my present God. Because by the time Yahweh came, Abraham was not a poor person also. No, he was well to do, giving an impression, according to the culture of those days, that even his first God, his first homestead God, was doing a good job. You know, his job was commendable, at least judging from what was expected from the homestead gods to do. But Abraham, to accept Yahweh, has raised several objections and arguments in the area of those who have taken time making a research in these areas. For example, they say that if the first God was performing well, why did Abraham, you see, change gods? And usually, rarely though, that a homestead could have more than one God, you see. And if ever that happened, you know so well that you are handling a chief's home, for example, or a home which is moving towards becoming a monarchy of some type. And several factors could definitely lead to a homestead having more than one God. But generally, it was acceptable that a homestead can have only one God. And so the argument is, how come that Abraham chucks his first God, who was performing very well so far, you see, yes, to a point that Yahweh decides to come in the home, whereby it will be presentable enough for Yahweh to start putting his roots down. That's where the idea of faith begins here now. You know, don't ever forget, all our presentations have to do with faith. Yes, nothing else but faith. And anything outside faith here, it will have a very big problem to enter. But here we are. The first God was performing well. And that good performer, he was chosen by Abraham himself, as far as the culture is concerned. But Yahweh is not, God of heaven, or Yahweh is not going to be chosen by Abraham, because Abraham didn't even know that he existed. Then Yahweh comes and he introduces himself to Abraham, that I want to be your homestead God. We have no an idea how long Abraham took to say yes. The records don't seem to explain us too much of those details. But what we know for sure, that at last he said yes. And remember, he's saying yes to an invisible God. The first God was tangible. You could see him. I mean, it. Perhaps you could see it. You see, and it was a performer. Compared to the judgments or judgment of those days, or evaluation how God performed in those days, he was a performer. Now, to move away from a performing God to who is visible, of your own choice, to a God who is imposing upon himself, upon your homestead, and invited, remember, You see, you people, you read this Bible, and since you don't have the background of the culture, you see, you don't take time to think on how complicated the situations were in those days. That's why we have always to understand culture if we will be able to enjoy this holy book, because it was not written in the vacuum. And I have always been telling you that when God wants to communicate, he uses we human beings, or he uses us as his co-workers. He has stubbornly hung on that policy of a co-worker with me. To that one, I'm thankful. Weakness I have, backgrounds I have notwithstanding, he still uses me and you. He doesn't come on the clouds and he blows a trumpet and says, the whole world, look, I am Yahweh now. I have come for this reason and for that reason. No, he uses us, we human beings, to do his job. Ramifications notwithstanding. Yes, there will be always ramification. As we will see, when God chooses, there's always ramifications following. And the ramifications don't spare the one who has been chosen to do his work. Don't you worry of the ramifications once God has chosen you to do his job. But now here we come back to Abraham. You see? Yes. Let us get this very well, and we will be moving slowly on and on. When Abraham said yes, to whom was he saying yes? Those visits you read about did not come before Abraham said yes. And even visits, there's no way Abraham took them to be that serious that this is the God I said yes to. Seriously. When you evaluate them very well, Abraham had a long way to go. These were supernatural visitors, but were they the God you said yes to? True, there will be a conversation. But in those days, there were no gods whom you converse with, walking like humans, going down a certain pathway. Everything you read there simply doesn't fit so quickly to the cultures of that particular time. You couldn't come home and then you narrated it to your neighbors that I have been escorting my God. Everybody would laugh. Says you were escorting your God. Where was he going? And what do you mean? You have been escorting your God. But here we are. You see, here we stand with Abraham. The stories, all of those we read about Abraham's behavior towards his new God, comes to one word: faith. Yes. Before even God performed the wonders he was promising him, your descendants will be as many as the stars of heaven, and he had no children. And he was aging, by the way. You see, before all of that came to pass, the very time Abraham said yes to an invisible God, to a voice of an invisible God, that was a tremendous act which we who live nowadays can't fully digest and understand. How can it be? The word is faith. Let alone in the New Testament, we are going to have Abraham to be the father of those with faith. Raising a very fundamental question: is Abraham overtaking the place of Adam as it was supposed to be from the very beginning? Look at some of those fundamental questions where Adam totally failed. Abraham made it very easily, regardless of all ramifications. By the way, Adam didn't have any other people to talk to him, to laugh at him, to jeer him. No, he was free. You see, he only decided to say no to his faith and his maker, and he lost it completely. But here is a man beyond the Euphrates, okay, in that small town of or Wuli. And as the voice of Yahweh comes to him, no record of debate was recorded. Perhaps there was no need of that debate coming out. I don't know. But we don't have any record somewhere. And as a theologian, where there's no record, I can only go back to the background of issues and actions of that very time to see whether I can have some inkling, you see, an inkling to why Abraham says yes so quickly. The reason why God will choose Abraham, it is understood. Abraham was a man of status. Yes, actually a chief. That's why wherever he migrated to, kings knew that invaders have come. So he was a chief, by the way, properly in Mesopotamia. God could not make a blunder or a mistake to start with the poor people who can't do anything at that very time of his invasion of this planet, because poverty meant that the homestead god of that place is hopeless. We should not be adopted by anybody. You see, he can't perform. Can't you see that his homestead, where he is presiding, people are so poor? Can't you see that the home is not prosperous? Who loves a God who can't perform? In those days, a God who could not perform to a level of prosperity prepared his own end. And soon we will find out that those were the steps in which they used to chuck their gods in homestead and then adopt new gods of others who are richer. We will talk of that in just a second. But now, how much did Abraham know that by chucking his former God who made him reach that far? See, that question will also come later as God will be attempting to become a universal God in Babylonia, and we will handle it accordingly. But now we are back here with Abraham, and I want you to put yourself in the same shoes of Abraham. An invisible God is talking. Yes, I want it to be your homestead God, but my God is a performer. Abraham was not thinking in any way to chuck his homestead God for what the homestead God had already performed according to the culture of those times. All things you got, riches, name it, successes, was uh, credited to your homestead God, not you. Oh, you are a genius in entrepreneurship and all that. All of that in those days didn't count. It is nowadays where we will talk about them. And you cannot understand what I am telling you if you transfer those things now which we know now back to the Bible. We call them that in theology anachronism. Yes. And many of you read the Bible anachronically. You see, by taking it back to to those people. Sorry, let me stop here for now. I live in a very commercial place. I will continue when the situation comes down.